Hello everybody, my name is Pixel and welcome to the Sapphire Tech YouTube channel. Today we are going to be taking a look at the performance and optimization of Fortnite running on the Sapphire Pulse RX 5700 across a wide range of settings at a 1440p resolution. These settings will include full-blown epic settings, a quick look at almost epic settings, our very own optimized settings, and finally even competitive settings. Normally, when it comes to performance testing, we will see many outlets and even gamers themselves focusing very heavily on the average frame rate metric. However, I'm really not a big fan of this sort of testing methodology, especially in games that have got a competitive focus. While average frame rate numbers are great for comparing GPUs, I really don't think that they're very effective when it comes to actually demonstrating what kind of experience you can expect playing said games on said GPUs. Now, Fortnite, just like most other Battle Royale type games, is a very difficult game to confidently demonstrate the performance of. That's because the frame rate is going to be massively different based on where you land, how many people are alive, which way the bus flew in, whether or not you're farming or fighting, and many other variables on top of all that. For instance, fighting in Salty Springs when it's a hot drop location where 20 other people also landed is going to give you very different performance numbers compared to, let's say, long drop into a location on the edge of the map. Obviously, this leaves me in a rather awkward position. I mean, I could just show you the normal performance at epic, optimized and competitive settings, which is around 90 to 100 FPS for epic settings, between 140 and 170 for our optimized settings, and well above 300 FPS for competitive settings, and then just call it a day. I could back up these claims with both gameplay footage and benchmarks and sleep soundly at night knowing that I've not lied or misled anybody that watches this video. But I just don't really think that would be all that helpful, so instead I'm going to take a risk and actually focus on the worst case scenarios and just hope that most of you are able to follow along with some of the nuances that we're going to be talking about. First of all, you are going to notice that the vast majority of the gameplay that you're about to see has been taken from the Team Rumble game mode rather than normal solos, and this was done on purpose. I did spend a fair amount of time playing solos, but unfortunately I was unable to find a lobby that had more than, let's say, 10 to 15 people alive by the time that the second circle closed. So it was not exactly a great representation of the stresses placed on the system during a real competitive match. The great thing about Team Rumble when it comes to this sort of testing is that you are able to get up to 40 players into a relatively small circle, constantly building and constantly fighting, which is a great test when it comes to taxing most parts of a given system. So before we get into more detail, please remember that you should be seeing much higher frame rates, like 99% of the time when playing solos. We are doing this because nobody really cares about having 200 plus FPS when farming if you're only getting 20 when you get into a fight. Thankfully, low frames in a fight does not appear to be something that we're going to have to worry about while using the Sapphire Pulse RX 5700 because even at epic settings, in around the 3 to 4 hours of testing that I did at these settings, I don't believe that we ever dropped below the 60 FPS mark regardless of what was happening on screen. Also, one big bonus of being Team Red at the moment is that we've got access to Radeon anti-lag, which can shave off a big chunk of input latency that can make the 80 to 90 FPS that we get on epic settings feel much more like playing at around the 120 FPS mark. Personally, I will always opt for lower settings and higher frame rates when playing anything that requires that I aim with a mouse, and yet, with anti-lag enabled, I honestly did not feel like my aim was being held back by my frame rate, which is great news for any of you that intend to play this game totally maxed out. With that said, by turning down just a few of the settings by a single notch, we saw a very respectable 30-ish% bump to our frame rate. We simply set the view distance, shadows and effects to high rather than epic, and this bump in performance really gets us into that high refresh rate FreeSync sweet spot, and if you opt for the XT version of the Sapphire Pulse RX 5700, there is a good chance that you'll be holding much closer to around the 120 FPS minimum mark when running these almost epic settings. The difference in the colour of the trees and grass up close in this comparison is actually due to the clouds casting a shadow onto the hill and not by the change in settings. So ignoring that, you can see that there's actually very little visual difference while having a massive performance uptick. Next up, we are going to take a look at what I found to be the most optimised settings in terms of balancing out the graphics with visual clarity and performance. We stuck view distance, shadows and anti-aliasing onto high, kept the textures on epic, dropped effects down to low, and had the post-processing set to medium. The reason why we dropped the effects down to low is because this way we can prevent stuff like the grass and trees from blowing in the wind, which I personally find to be very distracting when scanning the map for targets. Also, the post-processing above medium really starts to impact the visuals at range as it tends to blur out distant objects. The biggest strength and weakness to these settings has got to be the shadow setting, because this can make seeing people inside boxes extremely difficult, but I can also appreciate just how super pretty they look. With these settings, we saw our frame rate stay pretty stable above and around the 40 FPS mark. Though we will look at a scene a little bit later in this video that did still manage to stress our system while running these settings, but so far, in around 7 or 8 hours of normal gameplay using these settings, we only saw these settings struggle the one time, and not in a situation that I believe most of you will ever find yourselves in, so don't worry too much about that. Now, providing that you have access to a 1440p 144Hz monitor with FreeSync compatibility, these settings are where I would personally turn on FreeSync at 144Hz and cap my FPS to around the 120 FPS mark and play with super stable frame times and no screen tearing. Not only will this be perfect for any content creators out there, as 120 being a multiple of 60 is going to ensure that you get smooth as silk recordings, but we also get to avoid the issues that come with any CPU bottleneck. You see, this is where things get kinda complicated. I selected these optimized settings in an attempt to sit just below the point where a CPU bottleneck could start to rear its ugly head, and we do manage to remain GPU bound 99% of the time. The reason why I'm pointing this out is that I'm running an i7-9700K at 5GHz alongside 16GB of 3500MHz memory, which is pretty much as fast as things can get right now, and still we manage to, on occasion, find our GPU having to wait for the rest of the system to catch up. You see this whenever the frame rate line starts to get really unstable and the GPU clock speed and usage starts to drop. The reason I bring this up is because in these situations, performance is no longer being dictated by the GPU, and no matter what graphics card you are running, you are likely going to be seeing very similar frame rates. If you are someone that's been holding on to a CPU for more than even a couple of years at this point, there is a very good chance that you will CPU bottleneck earlier, and it will result in lower frame rates. I actually already have quite a few videos in the works, but I really think I should look into a video covering both CPU and GPU bottlenecks soon. Up until fairly recently, barring a few outliers, it was really only the super high-end graphics cards where you would really see any sort of CPU bottleneck coming into play. However, with the recent leaps in performance of the mid to high-end GPUs, with the RX 5700 and 5700 XT being prime examples, I believe that this is a conversation that really needs to be had. And to understand why, we only really need to look at the competitive settings. Here we basically lower everything other than the view distance that we leave on the far setting, and this gives us the biggest advantage possible in terms of both visual clarity and performance. And this is in fact how many pro gamers choose to play the games themselves. Generally, with these settings, we are able to hold frame rates above 250, but we also spend most of our time totally bottlenecked by our CPU. If we ever see the frame rate dip below the 200 FPS mark, we can normally see that our GPU is not even at 50% load once you take into consideration the reduced clock speeds. What this means is that I'm unfortunately unable to tell you what kind of performance you can expect when playing on these settings, as it's going to be the rest of your rig which really dictates that. However, this is also extremely good news for the RX 5700 GPUs when it comes to competitive play at 1440p, because knowing that we are able to exceed the peak set by one of, if not the fastest overclock gaming CPUs on the market, the Pulse RX 5700 offers hands down the best bang for your buck, and you can stand firm in the knowledge that no one, regardless if they spent $1,000 on a GPU, are going to get a competitive advantage. In fact, due to Radeon anti-lag, they're probably going to be the ones at a disadvantage, so yeah. Now, since I don't play Fortnite too much these days, at least not to anywhere close to a competitive level, I did have my good friend Zacubus send me over a demo file of one of his most recent competitive matches, so we can get an idea of what the very worst of a worst case scenario actually looks like. I flew around for quite some time and eventually found this one view overlooking around 40 players all fighting to move into the circle during endgame, and I knew that this was where I had to show you guys. I was actually incredibly surprised that while close, even at epic settings we were able to hold on to that coveted 60 FPS minimum, which really does show how powerful this card really is. This is also that one spot that I mentioned earlier where our optimized settings really got a run for their money, with both the GPU and CPU being effectively maxed out at the same time. Even our competitive settings are seeing their lowest numbers so far. However, once again, we are totally CPU bottlenecked, so I'm confident that it's virtually impossible to get that frame rate any higher using hardware that's currently available on the market. Once again, I want to make sure that you all understand that the performance that you have seen here today is basically the very worst case scenario that we could possibly show, providing that you've got a decent CPU and some fast memory paired with your Sapphire Pulse RX 5700, you will almost always have a higher frame rate than what we have just showed. So taking everything into consideration, here's my advice. If you have either a 60 or 75Hz 1440p display and intend to play on epic settings, then go for it. This card is going to deliver you great performance at a great price. If you're running 120Hz plus and you want to go for epic settings, personally, I would consider lowering a few of them settings as we mentioned earlier in order to get an almost epic level of visuals while getting that frame rate above 100 most of the time. Or even better, pick up the Sapphire Pulse RX 5700 XT and do the settings tweak and you should be holding a beautiful 120. If you're somebody that plays a wide range of games or likes to optimize their settings to get that nice balance between the visuals and performance, then combining the RX 5700 with a high refresh rate 1440p display is going to be heaven, not only in Fortnite but basically in everything that you play. That said, you could still benefit from that bit of extra brute strength that we see in our Pulse RX 5700 XT, so please do the math and see if spending that little bit extra for a decent uplift in performance is something that you can stretch to. Finally, if you are someone that just plays competitive multiplayer and is always going to choose performance over visuals, you quite simply can't go wrong with the Pulse RX 5700. This is the one situation where I would not recommend stepping up to the XT model, as that bit of extra money could be better spent on either a CPU or a monitor upgrade in future. There is no point, if you're going to spend most of your time in a CPU bottleneck, in spending any more than what you need to on your GPU. And I say this as somebody that's supposed to be enticing you to buy our graphics cards. But anyway, before I get myself fired, from myself and everyone here at the Sapphire Tech YouTube channel, thank you so much for watching. I really hope this video has been of some use to you, and if it has, then please do consider slapping that subscribe button and dinging that bell so you get notified of our future uploads. Also, if you like this video, then you can leave it a like, and if you disliked it, there is a button for that too. All that we ask is that you please let us know what you disliked about the video in the comment section below, so we can try and address that going forward. If you've got any other suggestions, questions or feedback, please also leave that down in the comment section as well. We also have an active Instagram account that you can find at SapphireTech_official, so be sure to check us out over there if you are active over there as well. Anyway, once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, we will catch you later. Bye bye.